Welcome to Wealth Beyond the White Coat, a show where we dive deep into the world of financial freedom for dentists and medical professionals. I'm your host, Darren Flesher, a dentist with a passion for uncovering the strategies that lead to a prosperous life beyond the office. Every episode will explore the avenues of alternative investing, tax mitigation, and secrets to build wealth that the textbooks don't teach you. Whether you're looking to enhance your financial literacy, discover new investment opportunities, or simply find a better way to manage your money, this is the place where your financial health is the core of our conversations. Welcome to Wealth Beyond the White Coat, where your journey to financial clarity and freedom begins. All right, on today's podcast, we have Kara Kelley, the dynamic force behind clinical HR, an industry leader in HR consulting, particularly tailored for dental practices and clinical environments. Kara brings a wealth of experience having worked with emerging DSOs and solo practices alike. With a passion for shaping practice culture and streamlining HR processes, she offers unique insights into how dental professionals can cultivate a productive and compliant work environment while avoiding common pitfalls. Her focus is on a business case for HR solutions, along with a decade of experience, making her the perfect guest for Wealth Beyond the White Coat. Today, Kara will share actionable advice that goes beyond compliance, touching on how effective HR strategies can not only save money, but also foster long-term growth in your practice. So with that, Kara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we've chatted a little bit before. I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about your background and how you transitioned from what you were doing previously into HR and specifically for dental.
So HR I actually transitioned into during school. I had started going for a marketing degree, and I took an HR class as a general business credit and fell in love with it and switched my major. And toward the end of me actually wrapping up my degree, I at the time had been self-employed in a totally different field. I was a clinical massage therapist. And this was back in 2012 when we didn't just hire the first person who showed up on time and sober. So I, at the time, felt like I needed to have something other than self-employment, that wouldn't look great on a resume. And the other jobs I had before that were long enough before that I felt I needed to go find some place to work. I had planned on maybe working there for a year and a half, 2 years, something along those lines, just until I finished my degree, built a little bit on my resume, and then I could go work in some Fortune 500 company in the HR department and work my way up to HR manager, HR director. Yeah, none of that actually happened because I landed at a dental CPA firm, of all things doing marketing. But at the time I was like, yeah, it's just I need to be doing something on my resume. It doesn't have to be HR. So I did. I went to work for this firm and I started working with them in marketing. And my boss at the time, the CPA, had wanted me to attend some of the client meetings so that I could hear, the advice that he was giving and the questions that were asked by clients and get a little bit more background to be able to do a better job marketing to dentists and doctors. We also serve small medical practices. And in some of those meetings, there were questions that my boss couldn't answer because they were not financial questions, they were HR questions. So I answered them. And I ended up staying there about 7.5 or so years and building myself into a role of my last title was business development and HR consultant or business development HR advisor. And I did everything there from doing actual HR advisory for the clients, to writing employee handbooks, answering questions for employee relations, helping with developing bonus structures, to occasionally did some light tax prep work, some light bookkeeping. I still ended up doing the marketing for the entire 7.5 years there, including building out the website and attending events, and actually ended up speaking at the end of it, which is part of how I rolled into what I'm doing now. I also did internal HR for the firm and just a whole lot of things. Things like even like drafting business plans for clients, doctors to secure funding from banks whenever they're looking to start or acquire a practice. And so I have a really broad business background when it comes to dentistry specifically, but just private healthcare in general. And I found that I actually really enjoyed working with dentists. I found my people. And so whenever it was time where I was tired of being mistaken for an accountant, first of all. So I'd already thought about branching out and starting something, but I originally wanted to start a firm because of the content we had produced. We had been engaged to produce some practice finance education for one of the AGD chapters, one of the state AGD chapters. And we were looking at turning that into an online course later that year. This was at the end of 2019. My boss at the time was like, and this would be great, and you can put some of your HR stuff there. And I was like, yeah, I could, but most people don't go to a CPA firm to learn about HR. So if I was going to do that level of work and put in that effort, I really want it to be my own branding, my own baby, my own thing. And he said, yeah, sure, sounds great. So I started an LLC with the full intent of it just being an education firm, education and speaking. And then at the end of 2020, I ended up separating from the CPA firm and thinking, okay, let me just really focus on this. And we all know what happened about 3 weeks later. We had a pandemic. So all my good intentions of going and being an HR speaker and building courses and this and that just completely flew out the window that year. I did a complete 360 back to being a consultant and dealing with the alphabet soup of acronyms that the IRS and the Department of Labor were throwing out. And I did about 40 webinars that year on FFCRA and the IRS regulations and Department of Labor and what do we do if our employees get COVID and all the things we all just would love to forget about right now, right? But
Yeah.
that actually ended up being where I really launched my firm was the beginning of the pandemic.
Very cool. Yeah, I always appreciate people who have a broad experience and then narrow what they want to focus on, but they bring all that background and experience to what they're doing. I feel like it offers unique perspective and a global perspective when they're making decisions or offering advice to clients. I appreciate you sharing your background. Related to the dental CPA firm, you were working there obviously as you were transitioning to what you now do, or that was your kind of your last stop. How would you say those experiences really shaped your approach to HR for dental practices?
So I really do take a business focus on it. Whenever I'm looking at something like making a recommendation for paid time off policies or bonus structures or things of that nature, I don't come from the light and fluffy place of, oh, but your employees are just amazing and they deserve all the things and you should give them lots and lots of money. This is the business case for it. This is what's costing you whenever you have turnover. This is what it's costing you by not having these things. Let me actually show you how much you've lost. And I've had some practices that I've actually worked out the math for them on what their turnovers cost based on even a conservative estimate. And I had one of my first ones I did that for in my own company. They were losing about $180,000 a year by having turnover because they didn't have a lot of benefits. Even this was actually a larger corporate practice, looking at becoming a DSO, and they still didn't really have the benefits that we have now. This is really early in pandemic, of course, and so there was something that I had to work through with them, and everybody was getting extra time at that point anyway. But we did some modifications to their business structure, and it helps decrease their turnover rate, which of course ends up saving them money.
Hey, I just want to interrupt real quick and say thanks for listening to the podcast. If you didn't know, we have an associated Facebook group also called Wealth Beyond the White Coat. Over there, you can ask your questions, get feedback from group members, and have a close community of medical professionals who are likely interested in the same things as you. Whether it's alternative investing, tax mitigation, ways to keep more of your money, or even protect your assets, we're going to discuss those things in the group. Additionally, we have a private investors club called Legacy Point. As a member, you'll get exclusive discounts to preferred vendors, and you'll get access to private investments that you'll find nowhere else. Whether it's hotels, apartments, oil and gas, equipment rental, you name it, we'll be discussing those details and offering those investments to members only inside Legacy Point Group. If you want to learn more about that, please contact me or simply email info, INFO, at legacypointgroup.com or go to the website legacypointgroup.com. And Wealth Beyond the White Coat podcast listeners get an exclusive discount if you use the code WealthBeyond. That's all caps, all together, WealthBeyond at checkout. I'd love to have you in the group, and I'd love to see you making more passive income as you move towards financial freedom, whether it's freedom to retire early, spend more time with your family, go on more vacations, or just do more of what you love while you're in the operatory. I'd love to see you doing that as part of Legacy Point. So here's to improving your financial health. So let's go a little bit further into dental. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about that today. And I know you've outlined some of the good and right down the middle stuff that you do, but let's get to some of the bad. In your work with some of your dental clients, what are some of the biggest struggles in HR specifically that you've seen practice owners struggle with?
Other than finding and retaining team members, a lot of where the money ends up leaving the bank account is because they don't understand the compliance side. And while it seems like, oh my gosh, we're inundated with compliance, we've got dental board compliance and OSHA compliance and HIPAA and cybersecurity and all the things. we tend to leave HR till the very end, or we wait until there's actually a problem before we do something about it. And this presents in so many ways. It can be just direct management. It could be things like getting a handbook in place. We wait until somebody got in trouble for something and we didn't have that policy, and all of a sudden we're scrambling. It could be something along the lines even simple, like my team member can't show up for work on time, and I've let that continue to go on. Now I want to fire them. What do I do? But they didn't actually give any warnings. They didn't have any documentation other than the payroll. The employee was surprised that they were let go. And so they end up losing the unemployment case, and the employee gets unemployment benefits that they probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise had we actually had the appropriate documentation and actually taken a consistent application of that policy that they have for attendance.
Very good. You mentioned working with DSOs and emerging group practices. If it does, how does the HR landscape differ for a larger practice compared to a solo practitioner?
Typically, they have a little better budget for things like benefits, but I don't even know on the compliance side that I can really say that they're that much better. There are some, of course, that are going to be doing it, and there even in private practice, there are plenty who are doing things. Some, if you're talking about emerging groups, even have an HR professional on board. But what I have seen, or at least, sorry, they don't necessarily have an HR professional on board. They have an HR position. I guess I should put it that way. Because I have actually seen practices that have 10 plus locations and no employee handbook. They have 10 plus locations that are doing things like not paying team members for CE time, for training time, something that's federal law for all states, regardless of how many employees you have. It's one that keeps getting missed. And even their HR person, they're not running background checks. They're not doing a lot of things that you would expect at that level. And it's a little surprising because I wonder at what point they're going to hit something that's really going to be problematic for them. If you build on a rocky foundation, it's not exactly the strongest system, correct?
Yeah, agreed. So, as an HR expert in the dental field, how do you think that effective HR management can directly impact the financial success of a practice?
Other than, like I said, helping mitigate fines and penalties and things for non-compliance, I really feel if we build a culture from an HR perspective, build a culture that people actually want to work for, it reduces some of our metrics that we look at HR, things like time to hire, for example. If you've got that practice that everybody knows is the employer of choice for your area, we know that this is who your team members want to work for. Whenever you have a position that is available, you have team members that are like, oh my gosh, I have a friend who has been dying to come work here. We talk about this all the time. She really wants to be part of this team. Can I bring her in for an interview? You have people who want to just give you a resume just to have on file because they want to come work for you. They don't really care what position. They know they want to work for you. We look at in different industries. We would look maybe in. I just talked about this recently on another podcast where we were talking about Google and their insane over the top benefits that for us is just impossible to achieve in dentistry. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of that's one of the companies that's been historically a company tech people want to work for. They get out of school, they send Google their resume. They want to go work there because of all the amazing things that they hear about working for Google. Wrong or indifferent. Like I said, it's definitely a different profession on that side of things. But we want to have that kind of draw to be that person that people are compelled to work for just because they know how amazing it is to work there.
Yeah, I think culture is crucial, especially when you don't have other things to offer. You got to compete where you can. And so that's definitely a focus for some of these smaller practices, or it should be, if they want to be able to grab people that they otherwise might not be able to.
And you said
Uh,
that the word compete. That's the title of my
mhm.
keynote and actually one of my workshops in my ebook is called Compete with Culture. And I titled it that way because we don't have oftentimes the opportunity to compete on other levels. Post-pandemic, the rise of remote work has become, astronomically greater than what it was before. And so we have team members who are, working as assistants for the same amount that they could work for, say, Amazon customer service, and they would get to work from home on flex schedule with a couple weeks of paid vacation and health insurance just right off the bat. And we can't compete on that level with that type of benefit. We can't compete and allow people to have crazy flex schedules where your hygienist is rolling in at 10:30 in the morning with their Starbucks. And oh, as long as you get your work done, it's totally fine. No, we've got patient
Mhm.
schedules. We actually have to be on site. We have to do the things. We have to maintain the licenses and do all the things. And so you compete with what you can control. And in your practice, that's one thing that you have 100% control over is your practice culture. And it doesn't matter what size practice you are, you have control over that. It doesn't matter what you can afford to offer in benefits, your culture, the way that people feel whenever they step into your office as employees or patients, that is totally within your control. And so that's what we really need to focus on competing with.
So I know you've talked about the business case for HR and you try to incorporate that into your approach. Could you walk us through? I know it's probably hard to do, and that's probably why HR is such an avoidable subject for many dentists, but could you walk us through how you try to quantify the impact financially of an HR decision like turnover, compliance, things like that?
Compliance can vary. It depends on what you're not compliant with. I will quantify this for last year on one example for compliance is I-9s. I found so many practices last year that because we now have payroll companies that send the onboarding packets, they didn't realize that there's something that they needed to be doing with the I-9s, like reviewing documents or filling out the employer portion of it. And so they're just relying on the payroll company to take care of it. And when we are doing something like an employee handbook engagement, where I go through section by section so that they understand their rights and responsibilities as an employer, we get to that section of I-9s and I ask those questions. How are you doing them? Have you had employees bring in documentation? Are you telling them what documentation? Are you letting them choose? And so on and so forth. And I actually did the math and I saved practices potentially about $500,000 in 2023 based on the number of
Wow.
ones that were either not doing it properly or not doing them at all. I had a couple practices, large practices with over 30 employees that were just not doing I-9s, and that could be deemed to be substantial negligence, which is an even higher price tag. And so that
Wow.
adds up very quickly. So that would be one way is how high those fines can go. I know we also look at things like misclassification, classifying somebody as a 1099 contractor versus having them, on your payroll as a W-2 employee. I know that it's been a conversation that's been going on quite a bit in the last 10 years or so. And I think we're getting to the point where we understand that our associate that's full time and only working for us and is on our website and using our team and supplies and working on our schedule is a W-2 employee, not a 1099 contractor. But back in 2018, I had a practice. Oh, no, this was in 2019. They were being audited for 2018, I believe. I had a practice they had about 5 locations, and it turns out they had about 13 associates that were misclassified. And the fine for that from the IRS was $142,000 for fines, penalties, back taxes owed for that 1 year. And they can open it up to the 4 years that they're allowed to audit if you want to push back too hard on that. And we did. We tried to advocate for our client, knowing that they had misclassified their team members. We still, tried the best we could to get whatever we could for them as far as getting them, lenient treatment, as far as even trying to get it overturned. Tried to make all the arguments that we possibly could, and yeah, that it didn't fly. The IRS deemed that the doctors working for them did not have the opportunity for loss. They weren't actually running their own businesses. And
Yeah.
so that was one of the primary reasons why they determined that this was misclassification. And yeah, it was about $142,000 for the 1 year for 13 misclassified associates. So that is compliance side quantification of how much it can actually cost you if you're going to make those
Sure.
mistakes.
I was going to say on that independent contractor 1099 thing, that's often a discussion point when you're interviewing an associate candidate. Admittedly, I've had that conversation many times and have always ended up with them as a W-2 for all the reasons you listed. Is there really ever a use case for that classification in dentistry from your perspective?
For them to be a 1099 contractor?
Yes.
So yes, there actually is. If you have a specialist coming in and their business is to go around to other practices, or maybe they have a brick and mortar, but they do this a couple days a week for other practices, and maybe they come to your office a couple times a month and see patients there, but they're maintaining the records, they're not coming and presenting themselves as a member of the team. Somebody like that, and they may be bringing their own assistants, they may be using their own supplies, they have an actual opportunity for loss because they're running an actual business. That person could be a 1099. Anesthesiologists who are coming in to help with surgeries, those people can be 1099s. But anybody who's doing the business of the business and supporting the business of the business are going to be W-2 employees. And the length of time doesn't matter. I see that happen still frequently where temps are just paid straight to the temp out of pocket, cut them a check at the end of the day, and
Mhm.
then send them a 1099. Just because they were only there for a day doesn't necessarily automatically determine that they were an independent contractor. And then the ones that you're keeping long term certainly shouldn't be. Yes, there are some times where somebody that's working for your practice could be an actual legitimate 1099 contractor. I'm a 1099 contractor for practices. That's in
Yeah.
my agreement, is that I am not their employee. I'm sending them my agreement that they're signing versus me signing theirs. The work that I'm doing has nothing to do with dentistry, even though I work for dental practices. I'm doing HR, and so I'm an independent contractor. Yes,
Yeah.
you can have some. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. You mentioned working with growing DSOs. From an HR perspective, what are the key considerations a practice should make before deciding to join a DSO from a when it comes to HR?
So I think, are you talking about like selling their practice to a DSO and becoming a
Yeah.
DSO?
Yeah.
So
It's often we talk about trying to maintain the culture and what made the practice, but that just feels like a very catch-all term. What really should they be looking at when they're considering that?
I think they need to look at the culture of the DSO extremely well because just like with any practice of any size, there's great ones out there and there's ones that people have issues with. And there are, I'm sure y'all have all seen them on Facebook. I'm sure you've had these conversations on the podcast of people who sold to a DSO and realized that they weren't quite getting the deal that they thought they were, that things were changing. It sounds great where they say, oh, we're going to come in and take over operations. And in some cases, they do that extremely well, depending on which DSO you're looking at. Sometimes they really are able to allow the doctor to have influence and keep that culture that they've built for their team and for their patients. And other times, that's not exactly what happens. So I think you really do need to talk with other people who have sold to that DSO, not just look at the dollars, not just look at the bottom line and what you're going to walk home with, because I believe that's not always 100%. There's certain stipulations and certain agreements that even
Mhm.
from the financial side, it's not going to end up the way that you thought it would. But so really do your research on that. Really make sure that the culture of the DSO and the practices that have stayed with them, that have sold with them and stayed with them, where maybe the doctor who sold is still actually there, talk to them and see what their experience has been like. Because just like anything else, there is wealth that is quantified in more than just dollars. Being able to feel like this is still, a place that you call home, that you're still able to treat your patients as well as you possibly can, and do the best for your team as much as you possibly can be something that you look at more so than just the dollars.
Do you feel like there's any specific questions or processes that they should dig into, or is it just more of a conversation to see what they find out?
More of a conversation to see what they find out, I feel, but there are some things that you could specifically look at when you're talking about HR and for your team, talking about how things are going to be handled from the disciplinary side, things are what their employee handbook says. Maybe take a look at that and see what policies they plan on applying with your team, if any. Like I said, some of them don't actually have that either. The ones that are smart about it look at those types of things before they start acquiring practices. They look at how merging culture is going to impact what the practice is doing. Like I'm working with one right now that they're looking at purchasing 7 practices as the start to their emerging. And each of those practices are small practices. Most of them don't have an employee handbook. Some of them don't have significant benefits, but they're all just very small, under 10 employee practices that they're going to have to somehow integrate into one culture while not, scaring the entire team thinking, oh my gosh, this is just going to be the worst thing ever. We want them to know that we have this best interest, and that we are going to focus on building a culture that they actually want to work for. So I think digging in from that level, as far as what benefits are they going to be offering the team, what happens after they offer those initial benefits, do things start, getting cut off? What are you going to be able to do if you are staying on with them? What are you going to be able to do in the future when it comes to hiring new team members? How much influence do you have there? I think those types of things. And some doctors at that point in their career, they may not care. It may be like, I like the paycheck and I'm only going to
Yeah.
stay here for a year or so and then might drop out of here. And that's valid if that's what your strategy is. I totally understand. But the ones that really do want to focus on leaving that legacy and leaving something behind that they can be proud of, that their team still works there 10 years later, that their patients still come there 10 years later, that's what they're going to look at.
Thanks for joining us in part one of our discussion with Kara Kelley of Clinical HR. In this episode, we explored Kara's unique journey into HR, her insights into the challenges dental practices face, and how effective HR strategies can directly impact a practice's financial success. From compliance pitfalls to building a culture that attracts and retains top talent, Kara provided actionable advice to help dental professionals strengthen their teams and their practices. Be sure to join us in part two, where we dive deeper into practical strategies and real-world examples of HR solutions tailored for dentists. Thanks for listening in to Wealth Beyond the White Coat. Your time and attention mean a lot to us. If you found value in today's episode, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share it with your colleagues and friends. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more professionals like you striving for financial freedom. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of your financial health. Thank you for joining us on this journey to wealth beyond the white coat.